Thank you so much for everyone to be here. We're probably at the 17th anniversary of GTR Nordics, and it's an absolute delight to see over 650 attendees come in and gathering all together here today. We've got a wonderful representation from the full Nordics market, as well as Europe and some all over the world as well. It's a very packed day. We've got fantastic sessions, panels, case studies, all nicely put together by our George, who's here, is going to be able to help and answer any question if needed. But we're about to start soon. But first of all, I would like to thank dearly all our sponsors. Without them, we would not be able to be here. We would not be able to offer such a fantastic day. And we really do thank for their continuous support over 17 years. We're going to start very shortly. As I said, it's a long day. And I would kindly ask you to get together and raise your hand and a nice round of applause for Katrin Kleus. She is a global economic commentator from Svenska Dagbladet. That's my Swedish for you. And I would like to welcome on stage. She's going to guide you throughout all the day. If you need anything, just let us know. GTR is very much welcoming you today. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Beatrice. Welcome, everybody. As mentioned, I'm Katrin Kleus. I'm an economic commentator for Svenska Dagbladet, and I also work for the Swedish financial news channel EFN, and it is my great pleasure to be leading this day here from this stage here in Stockholm. And as mentioned, we have a fully packed day. These issues are, of course, more important than in a very long time, even in my own little world of economic commentary, where everything, of course, right now is about trade. Well, we're all waiting for trying to interpret and trying to understand what will happen, particularly when we will get a new president in the White House in the world's largest economy, something that will impact the issues we will be talking about today and the global economy as such. Before we kick off, and naturally we're going to start, because this is a conference about Nordic trade, export and supply chain financing, we're going to start talking about beauty. But before we do that, I have a few housekeeping points. Getting through the day without opening the event app is not a good idea. It will be difficult, so please open the event app. There's a QR code on your delegate badge, and this will provide you access to the agenda, the speakers and the delegate list, and so on and so forth. This is also an app that you can use to ask questions during each session. You can use it to respond to polling questions, and also you can access the event evaluation form. Speaking of this one, the evaluation form is, as mentioned, accessed through the event app. And of course, everybody loves an evaluation form, who doesn't? But if you need an extra incentive to fill it in, I also want to mention that there will be a draw at the end of the day, and the prize is an Apple Watch. So an extra incentive to fill in the evaluation form. Also, a reminder before we kick off, this is a big room. Please keep your belongings with you just to be safe. And I think those were all of the housekeeping points, and we are going to start, as promised, talking about beauty. David McCandless will provide the opening keynote this morning, and the title is Information is Beautiful. David is a London-based author. He's a data journalist and information designer. His blog and best-selling design books, Information is Beautiful, Knowledge is Beautiful, and Beautiful News, are dedicated to visualizing ideas, issues, knowledge, and data. Please welcome David McCandless.
Thank you, Katrina. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. Yeah, so my name is David McCandless. I live and work in London as a data journalist and information designer, and that's just a fancy way of saying that I love data and information, all kinds of data and information, numbers, ideas, words, statistics, and taking that data and information and visualizing it in graphical images that anyone can understand. And then I like to go a step further and design that visualized data and information so that it reveals something interesting, or allows us to focus on what's important in the sea of data that surrounds us, or, these days maybe drowns us. Or visualize it so that it tells a story. That's the data journalism part. And I think when you do that, when you gather data, you analyze it, you visualize it, you design it, you tell a story with it, strange and interesting and even quite magical things can start to happen to data and information. So this morning I want to take you on a bit of a data-driven tour of the universe, tell you some data-driven stories, and maybe by the end you'll agree with me that data is beautiful. So let's start with a data set I think we can all relate to, or maybe we struggle to relate to. Maybe you of all audiences perhaps have a better bead on this kind of data. But let's talk about billions. What does $1 billion look like, or $100 billion, or $1,000 billion? These numbers are routinely circulated in the media and in company reports. 50 billion for this takeover, 400 billion for this war. But these numbers are mind-bogglingly huge, and they're impossible to relate to in any everyday sense. So frustrated by this, I gathered all of these numbers from various sources, New York Times, Guardian, headline figures basically, and visualized them in this chart I call the billion-dollar-ogram. So the blocks here are sized according to the amounts, and the colors here represent the motivation behind the money. So green is revenue, pink is giving money away, and so on. So when you take big abstract data points like billions and you visualize them like this, you instantly have a different kind of relationship to them. You can literally see them. But more interestingly, you can start to see patterns and connections and links between numbers that would otherwise be scattered across multiple sources. Numbers you'd never necessarily see together. Let me just highlight some for you. Over here on the right here, we have the amount given to charity by the American people. Incredibly generous people, over $320 billion a year given to charity. And you can contrast that with the amount given in foreign aid by the top industrialized nations of the world, just 170 billion. In the middle there, we've got, this might be of interest to you, this is the current wealth stack of some of the biggest tech titans of our age. We've got Mark Zuckerberg there at the top on $128 billion of personal wealth. We've got Bill Gates, actually I think I can use first names, Bill on 139 billion. We've got Jeff on 195 billion, and Elon on a staggering $277 billion of personal wealth. And just for contrast, a sort of semi-random number I plucked, here's how much it would take to lift 1 billion people out of extreme poverty, about $175 billion. So often when you're looking at data, the story in data doesn't reside in the data points themselves. It resides in those gaps, in those contrasts, in those comparisons. So the act of visualization almost like creates a space, almost like a canvas for story, so we can start seeing those patterns. Now, this data has been sort of visualized almost like blocks, almost like Lego. So I can keep adding numbers as they emerge in the news, or adding historical figures that allow us to understand our spending going forward in the future. Like, for example, I could add the total eventual cost of the financial crisis to the world, the 2008 financial crisis. So imagine in your mind how much of the diagram might be taken up by that. Let me just add it. Here it is. $12,000 billion. That's pretty much how much the financial crisis cost. And right now we're at the tail end of another global crisis, the pandemic, hopefully. To date, emergency funding and bailouts and so on have totaled around about 15,500 billion. And it's hard to imagine a discrete figure that's larger than that, but even those numbers are small compared to how much we've discovered is hidden in offshore tax havens by the world's richest people. That figure is estimated to be around about 42,000 billion. By the way, sorry, I discovered you could do all these animations, fancy animations in PowerPoint, so you'll be seeing a few of these little transitions today. Now, these figures emerge all the time. They don't make any sense in a headline. They need to be contextualized. They need to be visualized alongside each other to be able to be understood. Now, we step beyond billions here. We're into the realm of trillions. 42,000 billion is, of course, 42 trillion. So I could take that number and situate it in a higher dimensional chart, inevitably, which I call the trillion-dollar-ogram. Here it is. Many numbers here, many trillions. But let me just make one comparison. We've got 42 trillion hidden in offshore tax havens, contrasted with the 16.5 trillion it would take for shift the world to renewable energy and give us a chance of staying below 2 degrees global warming or global heating. So that's one thing I love about doing with data is getting these abstract figures, kind of bringing them down to earth, crystallizing them, visualizing them, turning them into a landscape we can explore with our eyes and with our minds. And I want to show you another landscape of data now. Be curious, I want you to try and guess what this data set is. There's something that follows this trend. It peaks twice a year, once around about Easter, and then 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas. Has little mini peaks every Monday, but then flattens out in the summer. Any guesses? Any thoughts? You can shout them out if you want. Chocolate sales? Yep. I think some chocolate would be helpful to get it in. Yep. Power consumption. Yep. I mean, yeah. What's the sort of you're in the territory. Yeah. There's a loss of power, I would say. Say again. Stress levels, definitely stressful. Yeah, you're close, you're very close. It's actually most common breakup times, according to Facebook status updates. We scraped hundreds of thousands of Facebook status updates, legitimately and anonymously, I might say. This was the pattern that we found in the data. A mysterious peak around April Fool's Day. What did you do? Mondays, we think people come out of bad, conflictual weekends, update their statuses on the Monday with the bad news. Summer, well, you want to be young, free, and single for the summer, right? A little clear out there. And the lowest day of the year, of course, Christmas Day. Who would do that? Well, somebody would, because the data's not actually zero. So, we're generating so much data now, every hour, every second, social data, personal data, company data. It's creating this vast ocean of data. All the metaphors we have for data are of ubiquity, big data, the data lake. And I hear a phrase a lot in this trade, maybe you do as well, like data is the new oil. It's this new kind of resource, this new kind of fuel we can use to power innovation and services and so on. And I think, yeah, that's a good metaphor. But for me, I would modify it slightly. I feel like data is a new kind of soil. It almost feels like a new form of matter, a new kind of material that we can gather up, dig through, get our hands dirty with. And if we treat it in the right way, like a pattern, a story, a graphic, a visualization, it's like a flower that can bloom from this soil. And this soil is interesting, it's interactive, it kind of responds to questions, if you like. So a lot of the work that I do, I just start with a question, that's the journalist in me, and see how the data responds. So I might start with a simple question with an obvious answer, but when I look at it through the lens of data visualization, it can kind of take me in a different direction. So here's a simple question. I'm sure you know the answer. Who has the world's largest military budget, would you say? What would be your guess? China, maybe, yeah. Mm-hmm. US, yeah. Good guess, yeah, it is. USA, there it is. $916 billion in the last fiscal year. And here are the other of the world's largest military budgets for comparison, so you can get a bit of context for that number. That number is huge. It's so huge it can easily contain those 10 other top military budgets inside itself. And there's what the rest of the world spends on its military in its entirety. So you might see that red number and you might literally see red. It might chime with a political view you have of the states. It's out to police the world, it's got a military-industrial complex, and so on. But is it true that America has the world's largest military budget? Because you have to take into account the fact that America is an enormously, disproportionately wealthy country. Its economy is huge. It could easily contain 2 of the other biggest economies inside itself. These are the combined GDPs of the states. So its military budget is bound to be massively, disproportionately huge. Right? So to be truer, to be fairer, we need to modify a question. We need to say, who has the biggest military budget as a percentage of their GDP, as a percentage of their output? Now, you couldn't guess that. You need to look at the numbers to see. And when you do, these other countries swing into view. We couldn't see them because we were fixated on that headline figure. And the USA is actually 23rd in the world by this measure. So we live in this connected world now. We can no longer take a single data point and claim truth or get reactive. We have to connect it up to other numbers to get a richer, truer, more multifaceted view of the world. Now, I've had to exclude, obviously, one country from this data set, a massive outlier at the moment, a country that's currently having to spend a lot of its economy on its war effort, and that country is, of course, Ukraine. 36% of its economy currently piled into resisting Russian aggression. So we can do a similar thing with armies. Who is the biggest army, would you say? What would be your gut response? Biggest army? What would you say? Yeah, China? Yeah? Yeah, I think that's fair. That's a good guess. I think you're exactly right. 2.3 million strong. And there are some other countries there you might have predicted. But again, same problem. China has a massively, disproportionately huge population. Right? So to be truer, to be fairer, again, we need to modify the question. A better question might be, who has the biggest army as a percentage of population? And when you ask that, again, other countries swing into view. There's a reordering. But look at this. China plummets to 127th in the world. It actually has a tiny army for its size. So again, that's one of the things I love about data. You gather this soil up, grind it up, make a lens to see the world in a kind of more multifaceted, more multi-metric way. Kind of clearer picture, you could say. So, that appetite we have for visualization and for graphics and that kind of communication, I wonder if there isn't something cognitive about that. We are pattern hunters. Our eyes are exquisitely sensitive to variation in color, pattern, and shape. That's the language of the eye. Huge amount of neurons in our brain are just dedicated to the visual system. So if you're able to take the language of the mind, numbers, ideas, words, data, information, and convert it into the language of the eye, color, shape, and pattern, as you do in a data visualization or an information design, you're able to speak two languages simultaneously, each enhancing the other, each amplifying the other. It's a kind of more powerful way of communicating. I'll give you a few examples. Here's a current snapshot of currently what's going on in the telecoms industry. If this is your sector, you'll probably know this. It's a massive bun fight. Everyone is basically suing everyone else, mostly over tiny features of your smartphone. It's a patent war, basically. A couple of years ago, for example, Samsung lost a court case against Apple, the slide to unlock court case. They lost the ability they have to now pay Apple $400 million a year to use slide to unlock across all their devices. So let me explain what's going on in this image. Size of the blocks is yearly revenue. Red companies have decreasing or near decreasing revenue year on year. Black companies increasing. The arrows indicate court cases. Hard arrows are active. Dotted arrows are resolved. And then in the speech bubbles are why each company is suing the other. Like I said, over tiny features of your smartphone. There's quite a lot going on here, so let me just strip it down a bit. So let's take away those stories, those little annotations. And now we just got some logos, take away those away. Now we're just on the visual layer, just on the language of the eye layer. And on this level, your eye is exquisitely placed to answer two questions. Is there a relationship between decreasing revenue and legal activity? Is there a relationship between size of company and legal activity? Now, it's not necessarily something you can see straight away in a spreadsheet. See it here, layer on logos, layer on story. And suddenly you've got an image that's got multiple layers to it. It's got a sort of depth. It's like 2.5D, if you like. And if you designed it well, that means you harmonize the visual elements so they don't collide with each other. You can take it in a bunch of ways. You can see the whole pattern. You can kind of zoom in and get the stories and so on. So maybe you hear from my language, like visualization of data and numbers, it's very much like, I think, like a new kind of camera. It's like taking a photo of your data. And as a data journalist, I feel closer to being a photojournalist than I do to being a written print journalist. Because I find myself thinking compositionally, is this a wide shot or a zoom? What's in focus, what's out of focus? What's in the foreground, what's in the background? So I might take a satellite photo of some data, for example, see it from above, globally, yeah. This is some quite boring data I got from the United Nations, this next sequence. These are the biggest drug-using countries of the world, or biggest mind-altering drug-using countries of the world. I'm going to give you an alternative world tour here, the top 8 for each drug. So, different kind of story. So these are the biggest cocaine-using countries of the world. A little snapshot there. Then we have the biggest cannabis-using countries, a slightly different pattern. Although you are going to see a lot of Australia in this, by the way, a lot of Australia. Yeah. Then we have the biggest ecstasy-using countries. Actually, quite a lot of UK and Spain as well in this. Then we have the sort of amphetamine countries. This is relative to population size. So, again, Australia, Spain, and UK doing, it's kind of like a three-legged race, you could say. Amphetamines, and then we have opiates. We hear a lot about the US opiate crisis, and rightly so, but these countries have higher users relative to population size. Then we have the nicotine addicts, or the smokers, if you like. Different pattern there. And then finally, the drunks. There they are, all having a nice big, maybe this will be you later this evening. A different view. And, it's tempting, when you have a lot of data, it's tempting to show it all. But sometimes the story in the data is in a layer or in a pattern or just above. So it's not always, you don't always have to show the data. But seeing from above is one way of positioning this camera. But you can also zoom, so you can crash zoom to a few numbers or a bunch of statistics that might reveal something about a world or a topic or answer a question. Now, for instance, recently I've been researching and looking deeply into clean energy. I'm sure many of you are doing the same. And the news or the numbers from solar power and clean energy are very heartening. The potential solar power is amazing, really amazing. Literal rays of hope from that sector. We could realistically and feasibly, technically, extract about 401 million megawatt hours of electricity globally from solar power every day. What does that mean? Well, here's the entirety of humanity's electricity use per day, 63 million megawatt hours. And here's how much of that potential we're currently tapping into. In fact, we were tapping into 3 years ago, and I made this image. I checked in with the numbers last month. It's currently about 5.5%. Heartening. Beautiful in that sense. And these little zooms, these little images were actually an inspiration for a project I ran during the pandemic called Beautiful News, where every day for a year we released a graphic surfacing and visualizing some of the amazing, progressive, and positive things that are happening in the world that we can't always see when we're fixated on the negativity of the news. The news is important and necessary, but it does tend to emphasize the negative, the conflictual, the violent, the horrible, at the expense of us being able to see the positive things that are happening around the world, which are unnewsworthy because they're slow. They're happening in slow developments, they're subtle upticks, they're historic reductions, or they're happening in countries that, we don't always are not sort of considered newsworthy. But the movement, the gradual movement is a positive one. The world is getting better. It's not perfect by any sense, in any stretch, but it's definitely getting better. And let me just highlight a few trends. Like, for example, extreme poverty in the world is decreasing. That's a beautiful trend there. People living on less than $2 a day is decreasing. And in fact, this chart is a little deceptive in a way, because if I highlight this dropped from 16% to 9% between 2010 and 2017. That's equivalent of 140,000 people a day being lifted out of extreme poverty. 140,000 people a day. And at the same time, infrastructure changes like electrification are rising inexorably. We were about 70% in the 90s, cresting 90% now. That's the equivalent of 25,000 people a day being, receiving electricity and they're having their lives improved. And that and combined with health trends and global health trends has led to beautiful trends like this, where we've seen life expectancy in Africa soaring from unacceptable levels in the 60s to full life terms now. It's beautiful news. And it's nice to see these things. It adds a bit of nutrition to our information diet. News can be a little bit fast foody. It's kind of addictive and a bit yummy in some sense. But sometimes you need a side salad. You need just a side salad of positivity, I think, just to balance things out. And there's even some beautiful news coming out of the climate space. I know that's a big focus of what we're doing here today. Europe, for example, could power the world with wind power easily. There's 46% of the terrain is ready for wind power. We could do about 11 million turbines would power the world. A thought experiment in a way, but a sign of those potentials. Over 100 cities in the world are already powered by renewable power. Bogota, Montreal, Stockholm. Amazing. That's over 70% of energy being derived from renewable sources. And it's important we take these steps because many steps are needed to solve and deal with the climate crisis. We've got targets. This is where we need to get to by 2050. We need to get average yearly global emissions down to 2.1 tons per person. The world average is currently about 4.8. The UK is around at about 5.3 tons per year. EU average is around about 7. China is 7.2. And Canada, unfortunately, 13.5. And as we get up the scale, Australia and the US have got a lot of work to do. There is a lot of work to do, but it's a solvable problem in many respects because we have the technology and we have the know-how to be able to solve the climate crisis, and we will. Ultimately, we will do it. It starts with knowing where our emissions come from. These are the breakdown of global emissions. And one of the interesting things for me, you see aviation there, 1.9%. You see digital tech at 3.7%. But one of the standouts for me was how a lot of it's not on us as individuals. A lot of it comes from industry. Industry is by far the largest contributor, 30%. Agriculture, 20%. Buildings, about 17%. Half of those residential. Transportation, and so on. But then knowing this gives us a project plan. We know how to get what exact targets to target for reduction, how to get to 2030 decarbonization. Some of this is happening in solar power, electric vehicles, definitely. And I produced a big, I went really into this subject. I did a big project plan on how to get to net zero by 2050 and did a load of graphics around this. Yeah, really dove into this. But it's needed because we need, all these wide shots, these detailed graphics help us, guide us. They act as maps to navigate this space. These wide shots, basically, that's what you could call them. So the camera can go wide, and sometimes you need to see all that data to understand a topic. So I work in a space, I range across different topics. I've been looking at computer security recently, and this next image I didn't create, but I wish I had. This is by Nick Berry of Data Genetics. But this is what happens when you give people the chance to choose their own 4-digit PIN number. So this comes from analysis of 3.4 million leaked PIN numbers from a data breach, sadly. So it's a heat map. So along the vertical, we've got the first 2 digits, and along the bottom, we've got the second 2 digits. So that diagonal line is people using double digits, 23, 23, 56, 56. That horizontal line at the bottom there, that's the 19 line, people using their birth year, 1948, 1963. And then the heat in the bottom left there is people using their birth date in a month-day format. So it doesn't go over 31, basically. So this image is an emblem of our predictability, if you like. And 3 numbers emerge out of this data set as the most common. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 3, 2, 1. And 2580. Why 2580? Yep, straight down that keypad. An emblem of so these wide shots allow us to see what's going on. And the best of all, you can make them interactive. So that's when you do that wide shot, you can make things come interactive. And then you start seeing things you couldn't see before, patterns, underlying patterns, underlying patterns. So I did a little research into this space, and I started looking for visualizations. Data breaches are useful for creating certain graphics, but terrible in every other situation. See, these are some of the biggest ones of recent years. And when you create something interactive, it suddenly becomes, you can ask it questions, or you can filter and find your own stories. Here, filter by healthcare, you see a story emerging, 2009, 2010, a bad year for healthcare. And then in recent years, it's healthcare insurers that are getting hit with data breaches. And I aimed this lens also at this space, the supply chain and trading and so on. So there's lots of visualizations that explore this space. This is Ship Map, which is monitors the activity of every single ship going on in the world. You can see a lot of the activity moving. Classic regions is China, a lot of activity there. And you can start to see the paths and routes and trade and freight routes that exist as you examine these trades, the shipping lanes around the English Channel. There's the Panama Canal. Just quite beautiful, but then if you color code by container type, red is liquid, green is container, you start to see some of the beauty and elegance and just this amazing system that irrigates and fuels and powers the world every day. And looking at a broader sense, a general overview of flows with EU and China as the epicenters of global trade. And then there's a really great resource, maybe you come across it, called the Atlas of Economic Complexity, where you can browse import and export flows globally, see them, navigate the world, see different layers of that system, zoom into individual countries, see where the flows are going in and out. So it just reveals this intricate and amazing mechanism that's going on. You can even navigate the world in product stacks, so you can navigate as a product space, different products. And then at any point you can drill down and get more traditional data visualizations if you like. This is Sweden's imports and exports. Didn't know it was a big ICT exporter, cars as well there. And then you can see their share, Sweden's share of export markets. The colors here are individual commodities, so textiles, agriculture, stone, and so on. It's an interesting trend there. You can see all the different types of trade agreements that have happened. Sweden's are mostly obviously corralled by the EU. And then if you want to, you can drill down. This is Chatham House visualization, which examines flows directly. So you can cross-compare, get headline stats, see some detail about how these things interrelate. So the rich tapestry of this industry, the interrelations, the connections, can all be seen and visualized. Interactivity, it's just wonderful. I love it. I get really enthusiastic about it. I kind of aim this camera at anything. Like, for example, I'm a film lover, but I hate being conned. So here's a scene-by-scene, beat-by-beat analysis of some of the biggest based on a true story movies of recent years. Red scenes here are false, and green scenes are true. And the in-between colors are true-ish or false-ish, depending on the pedantry setting. There's a pedantry control at the top. Currently it's set to flexible, a little bit of dramatic license. You can tighten it up to some dramatic license or just max it out to the absolute truth. And we can use this to find out what has been the most false true story to come out of Hollywood in recent years. Let's take a look. The Imitation Game. You seen that movie? I mean, it's a lovely movie, but it's pretty much made up from start to finish. A travesty of the historic record. And for every movie, you can drill down, roll over each scene or beat, see what the movie said, see what the reality was, and it's double-sourced wherever possible. Yeah, it was a long weekend, that one. Yeah. But it's worth it because you pile in the love, you pile in the detail, you pile in the attention, you create something that can exist and persist online, kind of forever, really. So yeah, I just want to share with you like the beauty and the power and the detail and the extraordinary, views you can get of the world through data visualization. And a lot of data I've been showing you is classic data, quantifiable data, numbers, spreadsheets, databases, that kind of data. But you can also apply this approach to more qualitative data. So that might be relationship data, categorical data, customer data, more human fuzzy data. So an example of that might be this. This is a visualization of the political spectrum, the left and right political spectrum. And this image is a concept map. So it shows how ideas percolate down from government into society and culture, into individual families, and then into individuals and background and cycle. And like the billions, through contrast and comparison, you can tease out the differences, subtle and not so subtle, between each side. And it's helpful to see the differences because, especially in this space, when we don't know what the other side stands for, we tend to fill it with our projections, our biases, our caricatures. So it's helpful to see the differences. For example, on the left, there's more of an emphasis on fair trade. But on the right, it's more about free trade. Okay? On the left, the goal at the heart of the left is personal freedom for everyone. But the goal at the heart of the right is economic freedom for everyone. There's a difference. And like I said, it's helpful to see both sides because sometimes both sides, they use the same words, but they mean different things. Equality on the left, for example, means a level playing field for everyone. But equality on the right means opportunity for everyone. That's different. Freedom on the left is freedom from power and abuse. But freedom on the right is the freedom to succeed or fail, to bootstrap yourself, to do it yourself. So both sides, they stand for equality and they fight for freedom, but they're standing and fighting for slightly different concepts. And that's maybe sometimes where the conflict comes in between them. Now, I have to admit, I felt a little conflicted making this image. I'm a journalist, I'm a writer, I've worked for The Guardian and so on, and I noticed as I was making this image, I really wanted this left-hand side to sound better than the right-hand side. But I couldn't do that. I would create something that was visibly lopsided, visibly biased. So as part of my process of making this image, I really had to step into that right-hand side, really honor the perspectives there, and realize somewhat uncomfortably how much of myself was actually in that side. But it wasn't too uncomfortable because ultimately I was just looking at an image. There's something unthreatening about an image. If you hear somebody talking about their political views or telling you about your political views, you might feel like you have to shut down or turn away. But if you're seeing somebody's political views, that's somehow more acceptable. You can let that in. And there's a clue in the language. When you say to someone, oh, I see what you mean. I see where you're coming from. You're telling them that somehow you've mentally visualized their viewpoint and you can relate to it. You don't necessarily agree with it, but you can kind of let it in. So maybe there's a role for visualization in what feels like these more polarized, divided times to be able to see where people are coming from or see what they think. Maybe. So I really feel like visualization is like a language. And, all the charts and graphs and all the ways you can depict data in visual form, they're like the words of this language. And you already speak this language. You see and speak these words every day. So one of the things that's happening in visualization is the vocabulary is expanded. There are all these kind of new and interesting and fascinating ways to speak the language of data and visualization, if you like. And on top of that is that modern necessity for things to be beautiful in a visual sense. Everyone is looking at their phones, a few of you now, smartphones, Instagram, everything is visual now. So in order to communicate and to get your findings across or your presentation across, it's got to reach a certain visual bar. It's got to be sort of visually appealing in some sense. But when you get it right, when you get a visualization right, there's a popping sound in the brain. There's a feeling that you suddenly can see something you couldn't see before. So I'll just end on that. So a couple of years ago, I was reading a book by a New York academic called Clay Shirky. He writes about internet ethics and issues, and he wrote this book called Cognitive Surplus. And it's about how there are millions of people sitting around the world on desk jobs waiting for them to be harnessed for creative and humanitarian projects online. And he has a standout statistic in the book that really struck me. 200 billion person hours spent watching TV by US adults, contrasted with the 100 million person hours it took to create something as awesome as Wikipedia. Just as a kind of emblem of our potential, if you like. Now, what's interesting for me is I often sketch my images before I create them. And here was my sketch. As you can see from, I was way out with my mental scaling of 100 million. 100 million is a lot of money and it sounds like a lot, but relatively speaking, it might not be that much. And I think many of us have a trouble struggling scaling these large numbers. So I thought, I wonder if that's exploited. Like cognitive deficit, if you like. So I'd look around and I found this. Before he left office, President Obama announced the federal budget of the United States. So the amount of money needed to run the government apparatus of America, $3,500 billion, just shy of the GDP of Germany. But he said, well, it's a time of austerity, so I'm going to cut 100 million. Everyone's like, oh, good, 100 million, cut. Yeah, let's cut 100 million. So let's just do that visually, shall we? So take 3,500 billion. Now scale up in your mind 100 million. Just kind of visualize it in your mind. You can get it. So yeah, right, that. So let's just see how close you get. Let's see. 100 million relative to that. Let's have a look. Here it is. There we go. To be able to see that, to be able to be supported, to be able to see that, that to me is beautiful. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Please stay on for a few seconds. There might be a question from the audience.
Of course.
While you think about that, you've spoken very beautifully about how useful this language can be, but this is a room that wants to know about risks. So what are the risks of using this language and maybe relying on this language more than we are used to doing, right?
Yeah.
In the age of social media and screens and all of these things.
Exactly, yeah. Well, two things come to mind. I mean, first of all, I think risk is something that's not very well understood, and I think risk is one of the things that generally benefits from being visualized, because people don't, everyday people, I would say, and not maybe this audience, but find it difficult to calibrate and understand and make decisions based on risk. It's hard to understand. So there's a role, I think, for visualization in portraying risk and And then also, I think there are risks within visualization. I think that's fair because you can lie with statistics and you can really lie with visualized statistics. So I think there's a necessity to pair this with transparency of data, with sharing methodology, and being open about your process, so that it's not a power move. You're not trying to overcome or overpower people or misinform them.
Okay, thank you. Were there any questions?
I see a few on there.
Yeah, I see a few questions here. So this is 2 questions actually about risk. To what extent are you able to source data from China, and how far do you trust it? So related to what you just said.
Yes, we can access some data, and there is unfortunately a general feeling that a lot of Chinese data is unreliable. So we generally I don't use that kind of data. I generally go to central repositories, World Bank, Eurostat, and other organizations that upstream filter and check the data and use those sources wherever possible.
And one more question here. What is the most dangerous and common data trap you have seen people fall into?
Well, I think it's a bit like I said, people believing absolutely in the power, seeing a well-designed chart, it looks beautiful, it has a sense of authority, and it may be, the way it's been framed, or the way the axis has been clipped, or the way the data has been sourced. It's sometimes, you don't question those things because there's an immediacy and a directness to visual communication that sort of almost sometimes suspends our critical faculties. So, yeah, I would say, always be questioning.
So the risk is almost in the beauty of it.
Yes.
It's so effective.
Exactly.
That it just, yes, okay. Well, thank you. Thank
Pleasure.
you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.